Tonight we begin our journey into the quiet, candlelit world of the medieval past, a time without modern comforts, a time when pain was both familiar and unavoidable. There were no pills, no doctors as we know them, no clinics, no quick relief. Instead, there was endurance, nature, and the resilience of the human spirit. Before we settle deeper into the stillness, if these quiet stories bring you peace, consider liking the video and subscribing only if it truly helps you rest. And let me know where you're listening from tonight. It's always a soft joy to see who's drifting off with us around the world. Let's settle in now. Find a soft, quiet space. Let your shoulders relax. Let your thoughts slow down. Well, move gently, without urgency. Together, we'll explore how people long ago managed pain, not just with remedies, but with wisdom, ritual, and strength. For most people in the Middle Ages, pain was not an interruption. It was a constant companion. From birth to death, from the farmer to the queen, every person experienced discomfort on a level we rarely know today. Toothaches, swollen joints, wounds from work or war, chronic pain from hard labor, the ache of grief, the sting of hunger. Without antibiotics or anesthesia, they found other ways, some simple, some strange, but all born from necessity. Let's begin with the body. Tooth pain was one of the most dreaded sensations. A single bad tooth could torment someone for weeks. There were no dentists, no clean clinics, only rudimentary tools and passed-down techniques. People chewed cloves, not just for flavor, but because clove oil numbs the gums. They might press garlic or onions to the cheek, or rub sage or salt into the sore spot. And if the pain became unbearable, the tooth was pulled with no numbing, no sterilization, just force and courage. Joint pain, too, was common. The older you grew, the stiffer you became. Knees that had bent over fields for decades began to ache. Fingers curled from cold and repetition. There were no joint replacements, no physical therapy, but there was warmth, and there were herbs. Wool was tied tightly around joints. Ointments made from rosemary, mustard, and lard were massaged into the skin. People soaked in warm baths if they had access infused with chamomile or thyme. Even touch itself, the rubbing of oil into a tired leg, brought comfort. Not always relief, but comfort. When it came to deeper injuries, broken bones, infected wounds, burns, the body had to find its own way to heal, often with only the help of rudimentary remedies. People relied on poultices made from mashed herbs, mud, animal fat, or even cobwebs. Yes, cobwebs. Spider silk was believed to help blood clot and keep wounds clean. Some remedies helped. Others simply gave comfort through the act of doing anything. In monasteries, monks would care for the sick with what knowledge they had, copying ancient texts, trying combinations of plants, prayer, and hands-on care. Lavender and comfrey were favorites. Honey, 2. A natural antibiotic was used to treat burns and open sores. But outside of the monastery walls, in the villages and towns, people depended on each other. Wise women, midwives, and local healers passed knowledge from generation to generation. A certain bark for fever, a certain root for swelling, a cold compress made from stream water and moss. Even music and chanting were sometimes used not necessarily to cure, but to soothe, to give rhythm to the pain, to make it feel less lonely. Pain was rarely just physical. Grief, fear, and hunger brought their own sharpness. A lost child, a bad harvest, a war that took a brother or husband. These too were wounds, just deeper ones. And people coped. They cried quietly. They prayed. They held on to ritual and rhythm, the things that gave shape to days and meaning to suffering. Sleep, too, was a kind of medicine. If you could rest, truly rest, it was a small escape, a gift. So they wrapped themselves in wool, huddled close to family, shut the world out for a while. Sometimes pain came from illness that crept in without warning, coughs that turned to fevers, skin that blistered, bellies that cramped and swelled. When someone fell ill, the home shifted around them. Curtains were drawn, if there were any. Straw was changed beneath them. Bowls of broth appeared. Herbs were steeped, their steam rising softly through the room. Elderberries were used to fight infection. Peppermint eased the stomach. Willow bark was steeped to relieve aches, the ancestor of modern aspirin. These remedies weren't always effective, but they were made with care. And sometimes care was enough to give the body a better chance. In cities, healers often moved from house to house. Some were trained, many were not. The line between medicine and magic was thin. Charms were tied to wrists. Prayers were whispered. A slice of bread placed under the bed to draw sickness away. Some turned to the stars. Astrologers believed that certain illnesses came from imbalances in the heavens, that a fever might pass with the right alignment. Charts were drawn. Moons were tracked. Hope clung to whatever made sense in the chaos. And still, the pain remained. People bore it in silence or with prayers, or by singing softly to themselves. The goal was not always to stop the pain, but to endure it. Children, too, faced their share, teething with no cooling gels, fevers without fans. A small infection could turn serious, and yet they were resilient, held by mothers, sung to by grandmothers, watched over by fathers returning from the fields. The medieval home had its own language of care. It wasn't modern, but it was rooted in love, in routine, and in the quiet understanding that life was fragile. It makes you wonder how much of that quiet strength still lives in us today. Beyond the home, the wider world offered its own forms of pain and its own ways of coping. The marketplace was loud and crowded. People pushed carts over muddy roads, called out prices, argued over spoiled food. In that chaos, accidents happened. Cuts, bruises, twisted ankles, and rarely any time to stop and tend to them. For workers, especially peasants, pain was part of the job. You woke up sore and returned home exhausted. You worked through the ache because there was no alternative. No sick leave, no compensation, just another sunrise, and another task waiting for you. But even in the labor there were small comforts. A warm loaf of bread, a passing song, the shared glance of someone who understood. Medieval communities, though often poor, were close-knit. Neighbors helped neighbors. A woman in labor would be surrounded by other women. A man injured in the fields might be helped home by his son or a friend. No ambulance, no aid, just hands worn, calloused, but willing. The church, too, played a role in healing. Priests offered prayers and holy water. Saints were invoked for different ailments. Saint Sebastian for plague, Saint Apollonia for toothaches. People lit candles and hoped for relief, trusting in something beyond themselves. In many ways, pain brought people together. It reminded them of their limits and their dependence on one another. They didn't always understand the source of their suffering, but they found meaning in responding to it, with care, with ritual, with each other. And perhaps that's what we still seek, not to escape pain entirely, but to face it surrounded by kindness, held by community, softened by time. Let's stay here a little longer. The past still whispers, and we're not done listening. There were, of course, those whose pain was constant, not from injury or illness, but from the burdens life placed on them from the beginning. The elderly, for example, bent backs, worn joints, fading vision. They were respected for their wisdom, but age did not come with ease. Still, they remained part of daily life. Grandparents sat by the hearth, told stories, helped prepare food. Their presence was grounding, a reminder of time's passage and of survival. Women carried pain that was both physical and unspoken. Childbirth was dangerous. Many did not survive it. Others bore the loss of children. There were no hospitals, no epidurals, no modern safety nets, just breath, prayer, and the hands of other women guiding them through. And even outside of childbirth, the roles women held could be heavy. They rose before the sun, worked through it, and often long after it had gone. They carried water, kneaded bread, mended clothes, soothed children, and kept the rhythm of the home alive. They also bore the quiet pain of limitation, of being told what they could and couldn't do, where they could go, who they must marry, how they must behave. These weren't wounds of the body, but of the spirit. Men, too, carried their own silent weight, expected to be strong, to endure, to protect, even when they were afraid, even when they were grieving. To falter was shameful, so they pressed on, through war, through hunger, through the endless grind of labor. But despite the hardship, there was beauty. The way people looked after each other, the way stories were passed, the way love still bloomed quietly, in glances and gestures, in songs and shared bread. Not every kind of pain could be cured, but some of it could be carried together. We'll keep walking through these memories. You're doing well. Let the past speak softly. You're safe here. There were times when pain wasn't personal, but collective. Entire communities suffered together from famine, from disease, from war. When crops failed, it wasn't just one belly that went empty. It was everyone's. Bread became thinner. Soups were stretched. Weaker members of the village, the very young, the very old, suffered first. Yet people shared what they could. A neighbor's turnip, a bit of goat's milk, These small acts of generosity meant everything. During plagues, entire towns grew silent, streets emptied, doors were bolted. Fear settled into every breath. Those who stayed to care for the sick risked everything. Those who fled carried the guilt of leaving. Gravediggers became the busiest workers in town. Still, people searched for hope. They hung herbs in windows. They burned incense. They rang church bells, believing sound could drive illness away. They prayed endlessly to saints and to the sky. War, too, brought its own suffering. Fathers went off and didn't return. Sons were conscripted. Villages burned. Peace was always fragile, a candle in the wind. And yet people rebuilt, stone by stone. Life insisted on returning. Children played again in fields where soldiers once marched. Laughter returned, cautious but real. Pain gave way slowly to life. Through it all, the rhythm of the seasons continued. The planting, the harvest, the festivals, the mourning. Life in medieval times was deeply tied to the land, to the sun and the moon, to cycles older than memory. And in those cycles, people found something steady, something that told them this too will pass. If you're still listening, maybe you're feeling that rhythm too. A quiet heartbeat beneath the noise of life. Let's stay in it just a little longer. Pain in the medieval world wasn't always treated with remedies or rituals. Sometimes it was answered with meaning. People turned to stories, folk tales passed down from elders, parables told by candlelight, tales of saints who suffered more than they ever would and found glory after. These weren't just entertainment. They were medicine for the soul. A woman mourning a lost child might hear the story of Saint Margaret, who emerged from suffering with strength. A soldier returned from war might listen to a ballad about a knight's sorrow, not to erase his pain, but to feel seen in it. Pilgrimages were another way people dealt with pain. When all other cures failed, they walked, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, to a holy site, to a healing spring, to the relics of a saint. Every step was a prayer, every blister a cry for help. And sometimes they found peace not at the end of the journey, but in the walking itself. Even the architecture reflected this. Cathedrals rose like hands pressed together. Stone and glass held centuries of whispered pain and longing. Light filtered through stained windows, coloring the floor in soft blues and reds, a quiet balm for the eyes. There's a strange comfort in knowing that humans, across centuries, sought the same things: comfort, understanding, relief. And that, often, they found it in the simplest acts: walking, listening, sitting beside someone in silence. Are you still with me? If your mind has drifted, that's okay. This is a space for soft wandering, just like they did long ago. Let's continue, gently. Among the most overlooked sources of pain in medieval life was loneliness. While people often lived in close quarters, emotional solitude still crept in. A widow left alone after years of marriage. A child orphaned by plague. A farmer tending his land after losing all his sons to war. Grief had no medicine. It lingered quietly, like the morning fog that clung to the fields. People wore it in their eyes, in the heaviness of their steps. And yet life moved forward. not in great leaps, but in small, persistent ways. A shared loaf of bread, a candle lit at church, a neighbor who didn't speak, but sat with you anyway. Medieval people found solace in rituals, lighting a flame for the departed, leaving offerings at crossroads, holding vigils through the night, not to chase away spirits, but to feel close to those who had left. There was an understanding that sorrow had to be made visible, carved into stone, sung in dirges, woven into fabric. Only then could it begin to fade. Even silence had a purpose. A wife might sit quietly while spinning wool, remembering a lost child with each pass of the spindle. A monk might tend his garden without a word, each herb a memory, each row a prayer, and sometimes the land responded. A soft breeze, a sudden bloom, the gentle return of birdsong. Small things, but in sorrow they mattered. It's strange to think that someone centuries ago felt just like you might have, aching, missing, hoping for a sign, and maybe in listening now, you're giving voice to their silence. We'll carry their stories a bit further. The night is long, but we're not alone in it. As night deepened in medieval villages, the world took on a different rhythm. Shadows stretched across stone walls. Fires dimmed to glowing embers. The sounds of the day hammers, footsteps, distant voices gave way to a softer hush. And in that hush, people prepared for sleep. They followed patterns passed down through generations. Doors were barred, candles snuffed, children curled against parents. Stories were whispered in the dark, not just for comfort, but to mark the transition from day to night. Second sleep was common then. People would rest for a few hours, wake in the middle of the night, and then sleep again before dawn. In the waking period they might pray, talk quietly, even tend small chores. This rhythm felt natural, especially in a world without clocks. The darkness wasn't feared, not entirely. It was familiar. The stars were familiar, too, not just beautiful, but meaningful. People knew their patterns. A certain cluster signaled planting time. Another warned of winter's approach. The sky was their calendar, their clock, their map. Even the sounds of the night carried meaning. The creak of timber, the wind pressing against the door, the lowing of animals in the barn. These weren't distractions, they were part of the world's lullaby. And in that stillness, dreams came. Strange, vivid dreams. Some believed they were messages. Others just let them be. Either way, the dream world was as accepted a part of life as waking. Sleep, when it came, was often deep. Not always peaceful, but real. A surrender to something larger. A pause in the struggle. As you listen now, maybe your breathing is slower. Maybe the darkness around you feels more like a blanket than a void. You're doing just fine. The world has slowed, and you're right where you should be. Sometimes sleep came easily. Other nights it resisted. A mother might lie awake listening to her child's breath, watching the shadows shift on the ceiling. A farmer might replay the day in his head, a broken tool, a poor yield, a word said in anger. There were no pills, no sound machines, only time. In the quiet, thoughts wandered. Some found peace in prayers, repeated like a soft drumbeat. Others counted the sounds around them, the tick of the cooling fire, The snore of a sibling, the flutter of a bird outside. The body knew how to rest, even if the mind lingered. And there was comfort in knowing that someone else, just a stone wall away, was also awake, thinking, dreaming, remembering. Sleep wasn't always one long journey. It was many small crossings, drifting in and out, following the breath, surrendering, returning. When people dreamed, they often dreamed of the real world, of animals, of loved ones, of rivers they had never seen, but somehow remembered. Some kept dream journals, if they could write. Others simply told the morning fire what they had seen. Dreams were respected, a sign perhaps of something unseen, or maybe just a reflection of what the soul carried. And now, before we go deeper, how are you? Are you still here with me? Eyes closed? Or drifting? Has the room softened around you just a little? Wherever you are in this moment, you're doing enough. Well, continue. Slowly. There's still more to explore. The medieval night had layers. For those who lived near forests or wild lands, there was the sound of animals, owls calling, foxes rustling, the distant howl of wolves. These weren't always frightening. They were known, expected, woven into the fabric of nighttime life. For some, the moon was a companion. Its shape was watched carefully, not for beauty alone, but as a guide. Full moons meant more light for travel or tending animals. New moons brought deeper sleep and darker dreams. People believed the moon affected mood, fertility, even illness. Midwives marked lunar cycles. Farmers planted by moonlight. Its rhythm was trusted. And then there were dreams that didn't feel like dreams. Waking visions, half-sleep whispers, the kind of strange clarity that comes only when the world is silent. Some believe these moments were spiritual. Others simply let them pass. Whether sleeping in a shared room, a straw-stuffed cot, or under the stars, there was a shared vulnerability to the night, but also a shared trust that morning would return, that warmth would come, that the fire would still be burning. Sleep was a return to the earth, to stillness, to healing. And you, how are you doing? Are your eyes heavy? Is your breath slow and easy? If you're still awake, there's no rush. This space is here for you with no demands. And if you're already drifting, let yourself drift further. There's still more to come. As the night wore on, people slipped deeper into the folds of sleep. Their dreams shifted. Lighter ones faded. Heavier ones settled and full of symbols. Faces from the past, places they had never seen. Dreams were storytellers when no one else was speaking. And sometimes people woke in the darkness not from fear, but simply because that was the rhythm. A stir in the straw, a sip of water, a glance toward the glowing embers. Some might whisper a prayer. Others would sit quietly and listen to the wind, to the creak of the roof, to their own heartbeat. This was the time between sleeps, a space for thought, for intimacy, for stillness. Couples might speak in hushed voices. Parents might check on their children. A quiet moment of connection before the second descent into rest. In monasteries, the bell would ring for night-time prayer. Monks would rise, gather in silence, and chant by candlelight, their voices low and steady, their breath in unison with the sacred text. Then back to bed, until the next bell, This broken sleep, this waking pause was part of life. It didn't mean something was wrong. It meant the body was listening to the world around it. Perhaps you, too, feel that pause now, that in between. Not fully here, not fully gone. And that's okay. You're in the rhythm now, the ancient one. Let it carry you. As we continue, let your body remain soft. Let your breath stay slow and steady, just as it would have been for someone drifting to sleep inside a cold stone cottage centuries ago. Tonight, we move deeper into the ways pain shaped daily life, not just in the home, but across the wider medieval world. Let us walk now into the marketplace, among the calls of merchants, the clatter of carts, and the scent of tanned leather and dried fish. You'd also find people dealing quietly with pain. The blacksmith, his hands blistered from heat and hammer. The washerwoman, her back bent from long days at the river. The old man selling onions with swollen feet, and a cough that never left. There was no break from work, no paid leave, no sick days. People endured because survival demanded it. And yet, even here, in these bustling places, healing practices emerged. Vendors sold poultices made of clay and crushed herbs. Traveling apothecaries offered vials of vinegar tinctures and powders made from dried bones or burnt plant roots. Some treatments worked. Others were superstition wrapped in ritual. But all of it came from a desire to ease suffering, even for a moment. Outside the towns, in the rural fields and forests, pain came in different forms. Farmers rose before the sun, their bodies aching from planting, cutting, hauling, digging. The repetition wore down their joints and muscles. But stopping meant hunger. They wrapped sore limbs with cloth soaked in garlic water. They rubbed bruises with salves made from animal fat and yarrow. Sometimes they simply soaked their feet in cool river water and whispered to the wind. In colder months, pain settled into bones. The chill of frost lived in their fingers, and the damp crept into their chests. Still, they worked tending to animals, repairing roofs, pulling food from hard, frozen ground. And after the day was done, they would sit quietly near the hearth. Someone might hum a song. Someone might pass around a warm drink infused with honey, thyme, or nettle. The body knew it hurt, but it also knew it could rest for a while. And in that space between pain and peace, there was a kind of survival, not perfect, not painless, but enduring all the same. There were also those whose pain was hidden, not on the skin, not in the bones, but behind the eyes and in the quiet corners of the mind. What we now call sadness, grief, or depression had many names in the Middle Ages. Melancholia, black bile, sorrow or possession. They didn't have the words we use now, but they recognized the weight. They knew the stillness of someone who no longer laughed, the silence of a woman who stopped singing at the fire. Some believed the stars influenced the mind, that Saturn brought gloom, or the moon stirred the spirit. Others blamed imbalance in the humors. Too much black bile, they said, could darken the soul and invite spiritual shadow. A widow might be told her grief had lingered too long. A child who avoided eye contact might be watched for signs of otherworldly touch. A man who wept alone in barns might be pitied, or quietly avoided, but not always Dot in some villages. Compassion bloomed gently, like spring herbs. Elders told stories by lamplight, reminding the young that sadness visits all. Neighbors brought broth, bread soft in milk, or simply sat beside someone without saying a word. Herbalists prepared calming infusions, lemon balm for nerves, lavender to ease the heart, or chamomile tea to invite sleep. A small pillow filled with rosemary or crushed mint was placed near the bed to ward off restless thoughts. Sometimes a charm was worn a stone around the neck, or iron tucked into the hem, not to heal, but to guard the spirit against deeper shadows. And then there were the songs. Low, slow lullabies sung beside dying fires, not to chase away sorrow, but to hold it, to let it rest somewhere soft. Fathers might hum while mending tools. Mothers might rock beside cradles long emptied. Old women hummed alone by windows, the tune more breath than melody, for even then they knew not all pain could be fixed, not all sorrow asked to be cured. Some pain simply needed to be shared, held gently, named aloud, and carried together. Let's pause here for a moment. If you're still with me, feel free to soften your jaw, unclench your hands, and take a deep breath in and out. There's no rush. This story will wait for you. Now, let us continue gently deeper into the ways medieval people found relief, especially in the smallest, most ordinary moments. Sometimes healing was not found in herbs or rituals, but in the rhythm of daily life. The weaving of wool became a meditation. The hum of the spinning wheel gave the hands a task, and the mind a rhythm to follow. It soothed without demanding attention. Women humming while stirring stews, children gathering nettles while murmuring rhymes, grandfathers carving wood as light faded through small windows. These were rituals in their own right. Mothers kneading dough in the early morning often whispered quiet prayers, their palms pressing against warmth, and grain an act as soothing as it was nourishing. Some found healing in nature itself. A walk through a quiet forest could ease the weight of the heart. The sound of birdsong, the hush of wind in the trees, the feeling of earth beneath bare feet, cool and grounding. These were not cures, but comforts. There were charms and tokens passed down through generations, a scrap of ribbon worn at the wrist, blessed by a village elder, a small stone smoothed by time, kept in a pocket close to the skin, a braid of hair from a loved one, tied with thread and hidden beneath clothing. These talismans were not magic in the way we define it today. They were anchors, ways of holding on to meaning. When the world felt uncertain, folk remedies echoed in lullabies and games. Place a silver coin under the tongue for fever. Tie a red thread around an aching wrist. Whisper the name of the pain 3 times, and blow it into the wind. Words had power. Not only the chants of monks, but the stories told by firelight. A tale could distract from an ache. A myth could give suffering a shape, and a simple bedtime story could calm a restless spirit. When nothing else could, let's take another breath now. Let your ribs rise and fall with ease, and as you exhale, imagine placing your pain, whatever shape it takes, into a small wooden box. You Don't need to carry it all right now. Well, leave it by the hearth, safe and still, and return to it only if we choose. As our journey continues, let us move again into the physical body, the aches, the strains, the chronic burdens that medieval people carried each day. Some injuries came suddenly burns from the hearth, a twisted ankle on cobbled stone, a cut from harvesting tools, or a fall from a damp stair. Others arrived slowly, worn into the body over years, a hunched back from long hours at the loom, calloused knees from daily prayer, a stiff neck from grinding grain at the same angle season after season. There were also aches that lived in silence, headaches brought on by hunger, numbness in limbs during long fasts, shivering pain from long winters in uninsulated homes. And yet, pain did not end a day's work. There were gardens to tend, animals to feed, fires to keep lit, roofs to patch. Pain was folded into the routine, like flour into dough. Not something to remove, just something to carry. But where did comfort come from? Sometimes from the warmth of wool. Shepherds and spinners understood its quiet magic, how thick, layered wool retained warmth, eased muscle tension, and shielded bodies from the piercing wind. Woolen wraps were sometimes dampened, heated near the fire, and draped over backs or bellies to soothe pain. Other times, comfort came from water. Steam from boiled herbs was inhaled, slowly to open the lungs and ease the chest. Hot stones, wrapped in cloth, were tucked beneath feet at night, or laid gently across the stomach. Bathing was rare, but when it happened, it was sacred. A wooden tub filled with rainwater warmed by flame, dried rosemary or sage tossed into the water, for both fragrance and supposed healing. Hands pouring water over tired limbs, a moment where the body was not burdened but tended. Touch, too, brought healing. Massage, though not named, was practiced by instinct. A wife rubbing her husband's shoulders after the forge, a grandmother pressing a child's temples during fever, fingers moving in slow circles, carrying warmth and presence and care. Even animals offered comfort. A cat curled atop sore joints, a dog leaning against cold legs, the sound of steady breathing beside you on the hardest nights. When pain could not be removed, people made space for peace. Sometimes that meant stillness, lying in bed while watching the flicker of the hearth. Other times it meant breath, slow, careful, sacred. And so tonight, let us lie still for a while and honor that kind of strength. Close your eyes if they aren't already. Let your body rest like a quiet cottage under snow. Do not need to be without pain to deserve peace. As we move deeper into the world of medieval pain, let us spend time with those who lived on the margins, the people whose suffering often went unseen or unspoken. The elderly, for example, bore the quiet weight of time. Their bones creaked with each step, their vision blurred. Their breath came slower in winter, and their bodies responded less to healing. Herbs. Old age in the Middle Ages was rare. Reaching 50 was often considered a gift, and sometimes a burden. Some elders were revered as storytellers, caretakers of memory, holders of recipes, rituals, and songs. They sat by the hearth, telling tales of seasons past and children grown. Others were seen as strange, their forgetfulness mistaken for spells, their wandering words feared as signs of spirits. Still, they endured. Aching joints were wrapped in strips of warm cloth. Old fingers were rubbed with goose fat, or oils made from rosemary and marjoram. Worn backs rested against sun-warmed stone walls, and when walking grew too difficult, they leaned on carved wooden canes, passed down through generations. There were no retirement years, no pensions, no nursing homes, but there was rhythm and repetition and adaptation. They rose when the rooster called. They shelled peas beside the fire. They combed hair, stirred broth, said their prayers. Sometimes they sat and watched others move a gentle ache in their hearts. But peace in their stillness. Others on the edges included widows and widowers. Grief was a pain all its own. It did not swell or bleed, but it hollowed the chest and dimmed the eyes. Villagers mourned in their own ways. Some wore black or gray for months. Others left chairs empty at mealtime. Many spoke the names of their lost aloud, a kind of prayer and remembrance, and still others didn't speak at all, but carried their grief in silence in the way they folded linens, in the slowness of their footsteps, in the hush of their voices when saying good night. Communities sometimes helped. A neighbor brought extra bread. A niece visited each morning. A friend placed a sprig of thyme on the doorstep, a quiet message. You are not forgotten, even in a world so shaped by labor and hardship. Pain was not always ignored. It was noticed, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes imperfectly, but sometimes beautifully. To grow old, to grieve, to slow down, these were not failures. They were part of the same rhythm that shaped the turning of the seasons and the burning of every hearth. And so, if you're feeling weary now in body or in heart, know that you are not alone. We carry pain, but we carry each other too. Let us turn now to the passing of time, how the seasons themselves brought pain, and with it quiet forms of healing. Winter, in particular, was a season of endurance. It stiffened joints. It numbed fingers and toes. It made old wounds ache again, as if the cold itself carried memory. In the darkest months, daylight was brief. People woke and worked in shadow. They layered what clothing they had, wrapped heads and hands in wool, and huddled close to the fire. Wood was precious. So was warmth. Whole families slept in the same bed, not for comfort, but for survival. Sometimes warmth came not from fire, but from closeness, the breath of a child against your neck, the shared weight of a woolen blanket, the press of feet against feet beneath thick covers. In some homes, warmed stones were placed under blankets. In others, bricks heated near the fire served as foot warmers. Elders tucked herbs into their bedding mugwort to ease dreams, thyme to ease pain, bay leaves to guard the spirit. At night, the cold deepened. The wind slipped through stone cracks, and pain pressed harder against the body. But people prepared for it. A cup of hot broth, a wool sock dried near the fire, a neighbor's quiet knock with extra kindling. Even in winter, there were moments of light, the scent of bread rising in the early morning, the feel of steam against your cheeks while leaning over a boiling pot. A song hummed under breath while mending a torn sleeve. And then came springmedy, damp and filled with hope. The pain of cold was replaced by new aches, the sore muscles of planting, bending, lifting, stretching. But the days grew longer, and with the light returned motion, color, and breath. Herbs began to reappear, nettles and dandelions, violets peeking from earth softened by meltwater. Wild garlic and chickweed returned to the fields. Healers rejoiced. They crushed green leaves with stone, gathered roots with gratitude, and stirred the first salves of the year with. Spring came renewal, not just of the earth, but of the self. Aching muscles slowly softened. Stiff limbs found movement again. People stood longer at the well, walked farther to market, spoke more easily at the gate. The land, once frozen, released its hold, and with it, the body did too. The seasons taught people how to live with pain, not by resisting it, but by flowing with it. Let your breath now follow the shape of the year. Inhale the stillness of winter. Exhale into the awakening of spring. Pain, like weather, comes and goes, and like the earth, we learn to bend, not break. As day turned to evening in the medieval world, the atmosphere softened. Work paused. Lanterns were lit. Fires were fed again. The world dimmed, but within the home, warmth gathered. Evenings were not free of pain, in fact, for many. This is when pain spoke loudest. The distractions of labor were gone. The body, still at last, made space for the aches it had held back all day. Throbbing joints, nagging headaches, the raw sting of cuts rubbed by cloth or burden. Even the quiet ache of loneliness became more present. But night also brought ritual. It was a time for mending both cloth and spirit, hands busy with stitching torn garments, fingers braiding cord or twine, spinning wheels turning in rhythm, soft as breath. Children nestled against a parent's side, a candle flickering between two shadows on a wall. Steam rose from simple drinks, warm ale spiced with herbs, infusions of valerian, chamomile, or lemon balm. They didn't erase pain, but they softened it. Music, too, became medicine. Not the music of grand halls, but of homespun melodies, lutes strummed beside the fire, flutes carved from hollow reeds, songs passed down through generations. A lullaby, hummed in low tones, could settle more than just children. It soothed the mind. It slowed the breath. It reminded listeners that even sorrow had a rhythm. Prayer often followed. Some whispered into blankets. Others crossed their foreheads, touching the worn wood of a cross hung on the wall. There were no miracles promised, only presence, only release. Aching bodies curled beneath woolen covers, the warmth of another beside them, the softness of straw mattresses, the scent of smoke, of oil, of earth. And still, life continued. Some homes opened their doors to strangers, a pilgrim seeking rest, a trader caught in the rain, a healer passing through. They were given bread, a place by the hearth, and a roof for the night. Kindness was a kind of healing. It was not loud or grand, but it wrapped itself around people like an extra quilt on a cold night. Even the night sounds became companions, the snap of the fire, the rustle of animals in the straw, the wind pressing gently against the door. The dark did not erase pain. but it allowed space for stillness. And in stillness, pain often quieted Dot. So now, if your eyes are growing heavy, let them close with ease. Let your body settle into the dark, just as this once did. You are safe in this story. You are held in the hush. And whatever pain you carry, you don't carry it alone. By the time night had deepened and the fires burned low, the medieval world grew still. The stars, faint behind clouds or frost, watched over homes made of timber, stone, and thatch. Inside, the hush settled fully. Children breathed in steady rhythm. The last logs cracked softly in the hearth. This was when people surrendered to rest, not always peacefully, but with the kind of resignation that comes from exhaustion. Pain lingered, of course, in joints and bellies, in teeth, in the quiet stirrings of the heart, but something else came with the dark, a sense of pause. No more labor, no more hauling or stitching or kneading or standing, no more choices to make. The night asked for nothing. Some people dreamed, others didn't. Some lay awake for hours, counting breaths or listening to owls or watching the orange glow of embers fading into gray. Many turned over memories. They remembered better seasons. Voices now gone, laughter that once echoed in kitchens and courtyards. Some wept into pillows stuffed with straw. Some reached out and found another hand beside them. Some slept curled against the wall, their back to the room, holding in everything that could not yet be shared. Others rested face up, eyes open to the rafters, lips moving in silent prayer for things long lost, or never had. The dark held all of it, pain and tenderness, ache and peace. For those who suffered most, sleep was not always a relief. Dreams could stir old griefs, phantom pains, wounds that had long healed in the flesh, but still whispered in the mind. Yet the body, even wounded, sought quiet. A back curled tighter. A hand slid beneath the chin. A child murmured in sleep. A mother exhaled into stillness. A soldier shifted on his cot and let go just a little. Night was not escape, but it was an agreement, a truce between the body and its burdens. The wind outside was cold. The stones beneath the bed were hard, but above them was a roof. Around them, breath, sometimes a whisper, sometimes just silence. And sometimes that was enough. Pain was not always gone by morning, but it was carried more gently, lifted by hours of stillness and the weight of dreams. So if you are resting now or drifting or still clinging to wakefulness, you are exactly where you need to be. Let the dark wrap around you, soft as wool. Let the fire inside you fade to embers. Let the ache loosen its grip. You are not broken. You are only human, and even in pain, you are still allowed to rest. In the earliest hours before the first rooster's call, the medieval world stirred slowly. The fire, reduced to its faintest glow, whispered beneath ash. Somewhere a child turned in sleep. A kettle was placed near coals, waiting to be warmed. Pain did not vanish in the quiet hours before dawn. It settled differently. Numb, low, still present beneath every movement. The body, after hours of rest, was stiff. For those with swollen joints or chronic injuries, mornings brought renewed struggle. Rising required effort. Knees protested. Fingers refused to bend. If people rose, the day had no mercy for aching limbs. There were tasks to complete, mouths to feed, and no one to replace them. They moved slowly at first, stretching beside the fire, splashing cold water on their face, rubbing wrists, shoulders, backs. A thick woolen shawl was wrapped over the spine. Warmed stones from the hearth were pressed gently against the abdomen or neck. Old women whispered small morning blessings under their breath, not always religious, but always sacred. In farms and cottages movement began. Bread was set to rise. Chickens stirred. Milking stools creaked. Some lit candles to chase the final darkness. Others worked by instinct. Hands practiced in early light. Pain was there too. It always was. But so was rhythm. And rhythm gave shape to the ache. In cities. Those with coin visited apothecaries. Morning remedies were sold in bundles: dried lavender, mustard seed, licorice root, some chewed willow bark to dull the sting of illness. Others burned sage to cleanse rooms of heaviness. In poorer homes, healing came from memory: what grandmother used, what neighbor tried, what the earth had always offered. The sound of footsteps grew, hooves on wet ground, doors creaking open, carts rumbling into market streets. With each noise the world returned to motion, and within it, so did the people, even with pain, especially with pain. And now, if you are still with me, if your breath is slow, and your eyes are heavy lit, this new day arrived gently, without pulling you from rest. You don't need to rise just yet. Let the morning carry on without urgency. You are safe, wrapped in quiet, free to remain in the warmth and ease of this moment. Morning stretched slowly across the landscape. Golden light spilled over hills, rooftops, and fields left damp with dew. Birdsong threaded the silence. The air was brisk, edged with the coolness of stone and soil. But inside, the warmth of waking had taken root. Pain did not vanish with sunlight, but it often became quieter beneath purpose. The mind turned to tasks. The hands remembered motion, and for a little while, the ache became background. There were herbs to gather, clothes to mend, bread to knead, and floors to sweep. Children were stirred from dreams, faces splashed with cold water, feet fitted into worn leather shoes. Some groaned, some cried, some laughed. The home, small as it may have been, filled with the rhythm of returning life for those who lived with lingering, pain-old wounds. Illness, the slow grind of age mornings, were a negotiation. Every movement required thought, every step patience. But they learned how to pace their strength. They knew the places to pause, the corners where light pooled, and how to sit with discomfort rather than fight. They found small joys: the scent of baked rye, the steam curling from a wooden bowl, the weight of a warm shawl pulled around shoulders, a neighbor's voice at the door, a child's song repeated from the day before. Some homes lit incense, or burned pine needles to freshen the air. Others hung sprigs of rosemary or lavender over doorways, believing they could protect, uplift, or simply soothe. There were whispered words before stepping outside: blessings, protections, rituals of habit passed down like heirlooms. And though pain followed, it did not define them. The day was long, Their bodies knew it, but their hearts continued forward. And now, listener, if you've made it this far, you've walked with them through firelight and silence, through ache and stillness, through dusk and dawn. Let this moment be your breath before the next thing. You have time. You have softness. There is no rush. Only the quiet hum of morning, and the knowledge that even in their pain, they rose, and so will you when you're ready. Outside, the world was stirring. The path beyond the door held footprints still soft in the morning mud. Tools leaned against barn walls. Smoke curled from chimneys. In the distance, a bell rang calling some to prayer, others to trade, a few to nothing at all. The air smelled of damp wood, moss, and earth recently turned by hand. Or hoofed not those who walked through pain each day, did not wait for healing to begin their lives. They moved with it, worked beside it, spoke through it. Their strength was not in being without pain, but in adapting to its presence. Without surrendering joy, there were weavers with twisted fingers, who still worked their looms, blacksmiths with aching backs who shaped iron with steady hands, midwives with sore knees who knelt for hours to bring forth new life, monks with failing eyesight who still copied texts by flickering light, and parents tired, hurting, uncomplaining who still smiled at their children each morning, tucking love between slices of bread or the fold of a cloak. Pain was rarely spoken aloud. There were no diaries to confess to, no physicians to consult unless you were rich or lucky. Instead, suffering was woven into the rhythm of the day like a silent thread. But that did not mean people bore it alone. They sang while they worked. They touched shoulders in passing. They shared warmth at tables, and stories that softened long days. A simple nod, a shared bowl, a moment of ladder thieves were acts of care, and always there were the remedies passed from one hand to another, a broth with marjoram, a poultice of comfrey root, boiled bark, salted compresses, gentle hands and quiet eyes in those small gestures. Something powerful lived a refusal to let pain consume everything, a choice to still light candles, to still plant seeds, to still hum a tune while sweeping the floor. So now, as we close this part of the journey, know that you have walked through their world step by step, breath by breath, not as a tourist, but as a guest, and in doing so, you've seen that pain and beauty, grief and resilience, often live side by side. Take a deep breath now. Let it be slow and full. Let your shoulders fall. You are not alone in your ache, and just like those who came before, you are stronger than you think. We'll continue soon. But for now, rest easy. You're safe here. Let us quietly return to the flickering candlelight of a small monastery in 12th century England. Here, monks in brown woolen robes move slowly between narrow stone corridors, their sandals brushing softly against the cold floor. Within these sacred walls, silence is a form of devotion, and the care of the sick is considered both a duty and a blessing. Infirmarians, monks, assigned to care for the ill-study old texts, and herbal guides passed down through centuries. The most famous of these might be the works of Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess, mystic, and healer whose knowledge of natural remedies became revered across medieval Europe. Her books, filled with recipes for salves, tonics, and purifying rituals, formed the backbone of monastic healing. Among the monks' most trusted remedies were herbs gathered from the monastery garden. Comfrey, known as bone knit, was used to heal bruises and broken limbs. Valerian was brewed into a calming tea for anxiety and sleeplessness. Feverfew was steeped for migraines, and sage aptly named for its association with wisdom was believed to sharpen the mind and strengthen the body. But healing was never purely physical. Pain was often interpreted as a spiritual, trialsome thing to be endured with patience and humility. Suffering, in the eyes of many religious scholars, cleansed the soul and aligned the sufferer with the passion of Christ. In fact, some saints were even said to rejoice in pain, believing it brought them closer to God. For common folk outside the monastery, however, access to such spiritualized medicine was rare. Instead, they relied on folk healers and village-wise women-keepers of oral traditions. Charmers and midwives used a blend of superstition, practical wisdom, and herbal lore. These healers often operated at the edge of society, both revered and feared. They might murmur incantations over wounds, or recite prayers backward to break curses. Though not officially sanctioned by the church, their remedies were often all that stood between a farmer and the relentless suffering of an infected tooth or festering sore dot. As we rest here in this sacred hush, surrounded by the scent of rosemary and beeswax, take a deep breath. Let the weight of the world soften, and know that even in ages past, people longed for peace, for relief, for a way to soothe the body without losing the soul. Now, gently, we drift onward beneath the dense canopy of medieval Europe's forests, where sunlight filtered through moss-covered branches, and time moved more slowly. Another world of healing, Thrivodone, hidden from scrolls and scribes, yet deeply rooted in memory and earth. Village healers, often women, passed their knowledge through whispered instruction and careful observation. A mother taught her daughter how to identify yarrow growing near streams, how to dry lavender in the rafters, how to grind willow bark to ease fevers. These were not university-trained physicians, but caretakers forged by necessity, by generations of trial and error. In many regions, midwives were among the most skilled of these practitioners. Far beyond assisting birth, they treated wounds, eased menstrual pain, created poultices, and recited blessings. Their power respected in some villages, resented in others often placed them under suspicion. In times of plague, drought, or famine, when suffering demanded an answer, the line between healer and scapegoat grew dangerously thin. The Church, striving to centralize authority, viewed unregulated healers with caution, while some clergy turned a blind eye to their practice. Others denounced it as heresy or witchcraft. Still, the need for comfort persisted, and these quiet caretakers continued their worksome times by candlelight, sometimes in secret. Among their remedies were concoctions strange to the modern tongue: hare's foot wrapped in cloth to stop nosebleeds, powdered toad for seizures, or charms made of herbs tied with red thread and worn close to the skin. Each recipe held layers of meaning: botanical, spiritual, cultural. A salve might be made with lard and marigold, but it also required a prayer, said precisely at midnight. Medical understanding was limited, and so pain was a puzzling invisible wound, a divine message, a punishment. At test, without microscopes or anatomy charts, people turned inward. They looked to dreams, to signs in the stars, to the way the body felt when rain was coming, or bread spoiled too fast. And yet, beneath these layers of belief and uncertainty, there was love. A mother cooling her child's forehead, a neighbor sharing the last of her time, a healer sitting beside a trembling stranger, offering not just medicine but presence. That, too, was part of the cure. So if your breath has grown deeper now, and your eyes heavier, you may let yourself drift with the wind among the trees where the past is soft, and pain is met with quiet care. In cities, where the clang of blacksmiths and the murmur of crowded markets filled the air, pain took on a different shape. The pace of life was quicker, the risk of injury higher. Tradesmen sliced hands on blades or crushed fingers beneath carts. Bakers burned themselves, and stonemasons lived with the dull ache of strained backs and cracked joints. Here, remedies were often rudimentary. A cloth soaked in vinegar might be tied around a wound. Boiled onions were applied to swellings. For broken bones, wooden splints were bound with linen. Strip-thou alignment was a matter of guesswork, and infections were common. When rot set in and fever followed, there was little to do but pray. For the poor, access to physicians was rare. Most could not afford the costly visit of a university-trained doctor, whose knowledge was rooted in the ancient texts of Galen and Hippocrates, often written in Latin, and taught far from the realities of laborers and servants. These physicians clung to the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness, they believed, was an imbalance of these elements, and treatment aimed to restore harmony. This might involve purging the bowels, inducing vomiting, or letting blood through a carefully placed incision. Leeches were popular for this, believed to draw out excess blood and cool the temperament. While these treatments were sometimes effective, they often weakened already frail patients, and the sight of blood trailing down a basin could terrify even the bravest heart. Barber surgeons, a different class altogether, offered more hands-on care. They shaved beards, pulled teeth, lanced boils, stitched wounds, and even performed amputations, often in full public view. Their tools were crude but efficient: knives, saws, hooks, cauterizing irons. There was little in the way of anesthetic. Patients were held down or given alcohol to dull the senses. Screams were common. Recovery uncertain. Despite the horror, these practices were born of necessity. In battlefields and back rooms, someone had to try. Someone had to act, to cut away decay and offer a chance hover's slime-at survival. And so, the streets and workshops of medieval towns held their own rhythm of care, rougher, louder, but still tethered to the same hope. The hope that pain, no matter how sharp, might one day pass, that the body, though bruised, might mend, and that comfort, even fleeting, might still be found in the hands of another. Let your thoughts soften now. The day is done enough. You are safe. You are warm. You may rest in the knowledge that even in the hardest of times, someone somewhere always tried to help. At the heart of many medieval towns stood the apothecaria place, where scent guided memory. Dried lavender hung in bunches from wooden beams. Rows of clay pots lined the shelves, each marked with looping script camphor, frankincense, poppy, wormwood. Mortar and pestle lay ready, waiting to grind nature into cure. Apothecaries were part chemist, part herbalist, part merchant. They prepared tinctures and poultices, balms and oils, drawing from trade routes that stretched from North Africa to the Levant. Spices like cinnamon, pepper, and cloves were not only prized for flavor but valued for their supposed healing power. A paste of cinnamon and honey might be applied to wounds. Nutmeg was believed to lift melancholy. Myrrh could be used as an antiseptic. They sold more than medicinal miracles in bottles, powders of hope. But much depended on who could pay. A noble woman might order rose oil steeped in almond milk, while a laborer's wife would settle for marigolds soaked in tallow. Both sought relief. Both clutched at comfort. Alongside the apothecaries were the charm sellers and amulet makers. In pockets or tied around necks, these tiny tokens carried prayers, verses, and symbols of protection. A sprig of rue bound in leather, a coin stamped with St. John's visage, a scrap of parchment with sacred words. Some believed these held power to ward off toothaches, nightmares, or even the Black Death, and behind it out beneath the trade and ritual fear was the aching question, why must we suffer? To many, pain was more than physical. It was tied to sin, to penance, to divine mystery. A monk might interpret his aching joints as punishment for pride. A widow might see her chronic illness as a test of faith. Few separated the body from the soul. Fewer still questioned suffering's place in the order of things, but despite the weight of this belief, moments of compassion still bloomed. A baker giving warm bread to a fevered neighbor, a child fetching cool water for a weary mother, a midwife sitting through the long hours of labor, whispering comfort between contractions. These quiet offerings stitched a kind of care that went beyond theory, rooted in presence and love, in the shared experience of being human. So, as the wind hums softly beyond your window, and your breath settles like the hush of evening, you may allow your body to rest, knowing that through centuries of trial, terror, and tenderness, people always reached Althauver, imperfect lito, ease another's pain. Far beyond the towns and monasteries, pain moved through places less touched by stone walls and books-through fields, mountain villages, and fishing harbors where life clung close to. The elements dot in these quiet corners of the world. People trusted in the rhythms of land and sky. A shepherd might treat a fever with elderflower steeped in hot water, picked at dawn while the dew was still sweet. A fisherman's wife might warm flat stones near the fire and wrap them in cloth to ease the ache in her husband's back. Remedies came from what was nettles, garlic, salt, beeswax, and knowledge was stored in memory, not paper. The community was the first and sometimes only source of support. Neighbors helped one another not just with tasks, but with healing. If a child fell ill, women came bearing warm broths and cloths soaked in vinegar. If a harvest injury occurred, men gathered to carry the wounded home. whispering prayers and brushing away flies. Pain was personal, but it was also shared. A burden made lighter by hands. Stories played a powerful role in these places. Folk tales were passed down, not only to entertain, but to make sense of suffering. A stubborn cough might be blamed on a restless spirit, a sudden illness on a cursed well. Though the logic was not scientific, the purpose was clear: to give pain meaning, to make it bearable, to imagine, even in the hardest moments, that there was a reason behind the hurtin', perhaps. A way to end it, that one such story told of a wandering herbalist who never stayed long in one village, but whose arrival brought sudden healing. She wore a faded cloak, her hair streaked with silver, and her baskets overflowed with plants no one else could name. She asked for nothing, only leaving behind a sprig of mint on each doorstep. Some said she was a saint, others a spirit, but those who remembered her claimed their pain vanished. When she passed through, these tales, whispered from hearth to hearth, offered more than fantasy. They gave comfort. They reminded the weary that pain was not the end of the story. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavier, you may imagine yourself wrapped in a warm woolen shawl, seated by a fire, listening to the low voice of an elder telling one such tale. And with each word your breath deepens, your muscles soften, and the aches of your day whatever shape, they begin to fade into quiet peace. Sometimes pain came without warning, swift, sharp, and beyond explanation. In such moments, medieval people turned to what they trusted most: prayer, ritual, and the divine. Church bells rang not just for timekeeping, but to call upon heaven's attention. A bell might toll in the dead of night if someone fell gravely ill. Its sound meant to ward off spirits and summon divine mercy. Families gathered by candlelight to recite the Pater Noster, hands clenched, eyes lifted toward unseen hopes. Holy relics were among the most treasured means of healing. Pilgrims walked for day-weeks. Evento reached shrines said to house the bones of saints, or fragments of sacred cloth. The shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury, for instance, drew thousands who believed that even a glimpse of his relic could cure lameness, blindness, or lingering fever. These journeys were not only about healing the body, they were acts of devotion, proof of faith, surrender, and longing. Some returned healed, others did not, but nearly all returned changed, having carried their pain across rivers and roads toward a place where they felt seen by something greater than themselves. Holy water was sprinkled over wounds. Crosses were drawn upon foreheads. Bread blessed by a priest was given to the ill, sometimes soaked in wine and placed beneath the tongue like a final act of grace. There were also rituals meant to expel pain's darker origins. If someone believed their suffering came from a curse or possession, they might call upon an exorcist or healer to perform a rite. This could involve chanting scripture, burning specific herbs, or even placing objects beneath the bed to confuse the spirits. And yet, even amid these mystical practices, there were moments of raw humanity. A father weeping beside his daughter's bed, a priest holding the trembling hand of a dying man. These were the quiet truths beneath the ceremonious moments. When belief met love, and ritual became tenderness. In every village, every hamlet, Every home of timber and stone pain visited. It was never welcome, but it was known. And through this knowing, people built a language of response not perfect, not always effective, but deeply human. Now, as night folds more softly around you, and your breath slows like a gently turning page, you may let go. Let the rituals fade into shadow. Let the prayers settle like dust upon old wooden pews, and rest in the thought that through centuries of trial, people always found a way to face what hurt with courage, with hope, and with care. Some pain lingered not in the body, but in the mind, though they had no words like depression or anxiety. Medieval people were not strangers to sorrow, restlessness, or despair. Grief from the loss of a child, fear during famine. The unease of sleepless nights, these weighed heavily, and remedies were sought just as urgently. Melancholy, as it was then called, was believed to stem from an excess of black bouillon of the four humors. Treatments ranged from herbal tonics and hot baths to music, prayer, and even time in nature. Gardens were not only for growing medicine, but for walking and reflecting. The rhythm of the seasons offered a kind of comfort, a reminder that even the coldest winter gave way to spring. In some abbeys, monks prescribed storytelling as a balm for restlessness. A familiar tale told beside the hearth could calm racing thoughts. A poem read aloud in the scriptorium might quiet a soul unsettled by visions or dreams. Even silence, deep, meditative silence, was seen as healing. Sleep, too, was considered a gift. To help it come, people drank warm milk with honey, or water infused with lettuce or poppy seeds. Bedding was simple straw mattresses, wool blankets, a carved wooden frame if one could afford it. But the ritual of preparing for rest-washing feet, saying prayers, lowering the flame created a sense of peace. However brief. At times, a person's unease was thought to come from sin, from unresolved guilt or spiritual conflict. In these cases, confession offered relief. Speaking burdens aloud to a priest shedding the weight of hidden thoughts was seen as a step toward healing. The soul could ache just as much as the flesh, and both needed tending. There were darker responses, too. When mental suffering became too great, some were locked away, misunderstood, or shunned, lacking the language or tools to explain what they felt. People bore their pain alone, and yet, across those same centuries, countless others found gentler paths. They were offered herbs, company, prayers, or simply a hand to hold. So now, if your thoughts feel tangled or your breath feels shallow, imagine a soft hand resting lightly over yours. No questions, no pressure, just quiet presence. Let your mind drift as softly as a candle's glow on old stone walls. Let the ache, if there is one, be acknowledged and released. You are not alone in your experience. You never have been. Among the most tender scenes of care in the medieval world were those that unfolded in the hush of childbirth. Though feared for its risks, childbirth was also one of the few realms where women held authority. It was the midwife, not the priest, or the physician who guided a mother through labor. Her knowledge was practical, instinctive, passed through hands and memory rather than books. She knew how to recognize the rhythm of contractions, how to turn a baby in the womb, how to calm fear with a low voice, and a steady gaze. She came with a birthing stool, herbs tucked into pouches, linen cloths boiled and dried. She came with prayers, two quiet ones, whispered under her breath, or said aloud if a birth turned perilous. A sprig of St. John's wort might be hung above the door. A candle blessed at Candlemas might be lit near the bed. These were acts of protection, of hope. For pain, there was little to offer beyond warm compresses, herbal brews, and breath. A mixture of crushed fennel and wine might dull the edge. Clary sage was believed to bring calm. But in truth, the greatest comfort came from presence women gathered in a circle, holding, humming, tending. Birth was a community moment, and its suffering was shared. When the baby arrivetered, wrinkled, squalling it was quickly swaddled, anointed, and laid against the mother's chest. In many homes, baptism followed almost immediately, for infant mortality was high, and no one wished to risk the child's soul. But for that brief window between arrival and exhaustion there was a sacred stillness, the kind where time seemed to stop, a mother's tears, a midwife's sigh, a whispered thanks to the Virgin. Pain gave way, if only for a moment, to life. This rhythm of loss and beginning, of ache and arrival, echoed everywhere, in battlefields and sickbeds and farms and keeps. Pain was not always tragic. Sometimes it marked transformation, the wound of growth, the cost of bringing something new into the world. Tonight, if you carry something heavy and ache that signals change, a weariness born of effort, let yourself soften. You have walked far, you have labored long, and even if no one else sees it, your journey is known here. So exhale slowly, as if releasing what no longer needs to be carried, and rest in the quiet truth. Pain, while never welcome, is often the doorway through which new beginnings arrive. Beyond the firelight, beneath the stars, another kind of healing took place, shaped not by herbs or holy water, but by time, by story, by the slow settling of the soul. In many medieval homes, the evening was when wounds were tended, not just those of the body, but of the spirit. After the labor of the day, when tools were set aside and the animals quieted, families gathered. Bread was broken, soup was ladled, and in that circle of warmth and flickering shadow, people spoke. They spoke of the day's troubles, a bad harvest, a neighbor's illness, a child's fall in the stream. They shared jokes, laments, blessings, and in that sharing, pain was acknowledged, its sharp edges dulled by the presence of others. Suffering, when named aloud, lost a little of its weight. Children curled close as elders told stories dolls of brave knights who carried wounds without complaint, or clever peasants who outwitted sickness with wit and wisdom. These stories were more than entertainment. They offered models of resilience, of grace under hardship. They gave pain a place and a purpose. Music, too, had its part. A lute strummed softly by the hearth, a lullaby hummed in an old tongue, a psalm sung low by a weary father-all of it wove comfort into the night. The melody didn't erase the pain, but it sat beside it. It witnessed it, and that was often enough. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. For many, the heavens held answers. Astrology was not a game, but a guide. A man might attribute his aching joints to the influence of Saturn. A woman might time a healing ritual to coincide with the waxing moon. The universe, vast and mysterious, seemed to speak in silence, and listening to it gave suffering meaning. Even dreams were believed to offer clues. A dream of clear water might signify recovery. A dream of fire, a warning. People kept dream books, consulted wise folk, and woke each morning not just to face the world, but to interpret what had stirred in their sleep. In this way, night was not an ending, but a quiet unfolding, a time when healing deepened, when pain eased not through cure, but through rest, connection, and belief. And so now, as your own night deepens, let these images settle around you like a cloak, a warm room, a gentle story, a song just beneath hearing. Let them carry you into the soft spaces where pain begins to fade, not because it is gone, but because you are not facing it alone. Close your eyes if you haven't already. The stars are still turning, and you are safe within their gaze. In moments when pain could not be eased, and suffering stretched long into days or seasons, the medieval world turned toward endurance hour, the quiet art of bearing for those with chronic affliction, solved war wounds, twisted joints, failing sight. There were few consistent remedies. What they had instead was rhythm, routine, a way of living that bent itself around discomfort. A man with a lame leg might craft a walking stick from ash wood, its handle worn smooth by years of use. A woman with aching hands might learn to weave with slower movements, her pace no less worthy than before. Communities played a role in this enduring. Work was shared. Neighbors checked in. At the village well or the monastery gate, word spread when someone was unwell. A portion of stew might be left on a doorstep, a child sent to fetch herbs. Help came not with fanfare, but with steadiness. There was dignity in persistence, in continuing to rise with the sun, to tend the fire, to say the evening prayer, even when the body cried out. Pain, though never desired, became part of the fabric of life, woven into the same threads as joy, labor, and faith. Some turned to writing. Monks recorded their ailments in margins, knots about headaches, toothaches, and failing vision sprawled between lines of scripture. Others composed poems or songs to name their pain and place it gently outside themselves. To give it shape was to lessen its power. And then there were the saints' figures who had suffered deeply and were believed to intercede on behalf of the suffering. Saint Lidwina of Hidam, bedridden for most of her life, was said to experience visions amid her agony. Her story offered a model of divine purpose in pain. To pray to her was to ask not only for healing, but for strength. Medieval people did not glorify suffering, but they did try to understand it. They surrounded it with meaning, and where meaning faltered, they built rituals of care, a touch on the shoulder, a bowl of broth, a candle lit at dusk. So if there is something in you tonight that lingers an ache, a sadness, a silent question, know this: you do not need to push it away. You may simply carry it, and let yourself be carried too, by the gentle rhythm of those who came before you, who bore what hurt, and still found beauty in the turning of each day. Let your breathing slow. Let your jaw soften, And rest in this pain does not define you. It only reminds you that you feel and feeling, even when it aches, is a sign you are still here, still human, still held by the quiet arms of time. In the final hours of life, pain took on its sharpest edge, but also its most sacred meaning. Medieval people did not shy away from death. It was ever present in war, in childbirth, in plague and hunger. But rather than speak of it with fear, they built rituals to prepare for it, to meet it with grace. The Ars Moriendi, or Art of Dying, was a popular text of the late Middle Ages. It taught how to face death well, with confession, with forgiveness, with prayers spoken by loved ones nearby. To die with one's soul in order was considered a victory, not a defeat. When someone neared the end, family gathered. Candles were lit to guide the soul. A crucifix was placed within sight, and holy water sprinkled on the forehead. If the dying person could speak, they whispered their final wish, soften a blessing, sometimes a plea. If they could not, others prayed for them, carrying their voice into the silence, pain in. These moments was accepted as a final trial. It might be eased with herbal draughts, henbane, or wine steeped with soporific herbs. Sometimes it could not be eased at all, and so hands were held tighter. Songs were sung louder. The room filled with presence, if not relief. Burial followed quickly. The body was washed with care, anointed, wrapped in linen. Friends and neighbors gathered for vigils, where memories were shared and tears allowed to fall without shame. Mourning was both public and personal, a weaving of ritual and raw emotion. But even in grief, there was a thread of peace. To have loved was to grieve. To have grieved was to have lived deeply. Pain, in this way, was proof of connection. Some left behind Tekensa rosary, a carved wooden comb, a pressed flower tucked between the pages of a psalter. These objects carried the scent of memory. A child might hold her mother's comb long after she was gone, running fingers along its smooth ridges like a prayer. A husband might wear a cross that once hung from his wife's neck, letting its weight remind him of her absent scene, her presence. So much of pain, in the end, was wrapped in love. Not in spite of it, but because of it. And now, if your body is still, and your heart feels tender, allow this moment to simply be. No need to change it. No need to push it away. Let the candles burn low. Let the breath move gently in and out. You are not alone in your hurting, and you are not alone in your healing. As night deepens and the hush settles fully over the earth, the world of the medieval past grows quiet once more. The fires have burned low. The monks have returned to their cells. The midwife's hands are folded in her lap, and the weary farmer, the injured soldier, the frightened child, they all lie still beneath woolen blankets, letting the dark carry them toward rest. Pain, though never absent, has softened in these hours, not gone, but cradled, acknowledged, given room to breathe. It is easy to think of the past as harsh, all shadows and struggle, but there was gentleness too. There was tenderness in the way a mother hummed, while pressing a warm cloth to her child's brow. There was love in the quiet companionship of an old couple, holding hands despite the ache in their bones. There was peace in the way a village gathered after loss, each person bringing a little food, a little warmth, a little time. These moments small, human, luminals wear forms of healing, not the kind found in jars or scrolls, but the kind stitched into daily life, a shared loaf of bread, a whispered blessing, a cool hand resting on a fevered brow. These were the medicines of the soul, and so we close this chapter not with finality, but with a slow exhale, a long breath out, releasing what has been held. You have traveled through centuries tonight. You have walked monastery halls, lingered in apothecaries, listened at hearthsides, stood beside the dying and the healed. You've seen that pain was never met with indifference. Always there was effort. Always there was care. So let your body sink a little deeper now. Let your shoulders fall, your jaw unclench. Let the breath come soft and easy. The world will turn on its own. You are not required to carry more than this moment. You are safe. You are tended. You are held. And as the stars wheel quietly over hedges, as they did centuries ago, you may rest. You may rest. There is a certain kind of wisdom that comes only through living with pain, it, just surviving it, but understanding it, tending it, and eventually learning to sit beside it without fear. In the later medieval centuries, as medicine slowly shifted from the mystical to the observational, a quiet transformation was beginning. Physicians and scholars started to question long-held beliefs, re-examining ancient texts, and translating new ones brought from the Islamic world. In cities like Salerno and later Padua, medical schools emerged, places where anatomy was studied, illness categorized, and treatments debated. And yet, even amid this growing thirst for knowledge, much of what helped people heal remained rooted in the simplest acts: warmth, kindness, patience. For most, the great advances of medicine remained out of reach. But the human need for comfort, so old, so persistent, was never far from the surface. Elderly women passed down their healing recipes. Village priests sat through long nights of fevered prayer. Children learned by watching how to steep herbs, how to soothe a scraped knee, how to hold someone's hand. When words were not enough, there was no single path through pain, no universal cure. And yet, people found ways to continue. They built a language of resilience through lullabies and blessings, poultices and psalms. They lived each day knowing the body was fragile, but also astonishingly brave. Even the smallest comforts: a clean cloth, a cup of warm broth, a moment of shared silence beckoned part of the ancient and sacred ritual of care. So tonight, if your breath is steady and your limbs have grown heavy, let yourself be still. You have arrived at the final stretch of this long, gentle journey. There is no need to reach for more. All that's left is rest. As the Middle Ages slowly gave way to new eras, the world began to change, but the echoes of medieval care did not vanish. They lingered in the way people watched over the sick, in the stories passed down from grandmothers to grandchildren, in the gardens still planted with lavender, sage, and thyme. Pain remained a part of life. So did the ways of meeting it with humility, with courage, with devotion. In many places, the line between old and new blurred. A university-trained doctor might still carry a charm in his pocket. A nun tending the ill might mix scripture with a salve of marigold. The wisdom of the past was not discarded, it simply folded itself into the present, softening the sharp edges of change. Even now, remnants of those older traditions remain. We speak of bedside manner, of healing touch, of the importance of being seen and heard when we suffer. These are not inventions of modern times, but inherited sweshers from the halls of monasteries, from the fire-warmed rooms of village healers. We do not live in the same world, but we carry their memories, and perhaps that is the quiet miracle that so much intention has been passed from hand to hand, across centuries, not through wealth or status, but through love, through the decision, again and again, to stay close to one another in times of pain. So as this story draws nearer to its close, you may allow your mind to soften like wax beneath a flame. Let go of the need to understand every detail. Let go of the weight of the day. What remains is enough that someone, somewhere, always cared. And in that caring, healing took root. In the quietest corners of the past, where no records remain and no names were written down, countless small acts of healing unfolded unnoticed. A daughter crushed, herbs with a stone for her mother's aching joints. A brother hummed a lullaby to calm a sister's fever dreams. A traveler gave his last crust of bread to a stranger, hoping to ease a hunger that medicine could not reach. These were not moments preserved in manuscripts or etched into stained glass, but they were real. They mattered. They tell us that even in times of darkness, people chose light. Even in an age where pain was everywhere and rinsea, unexplainedly reached for one another with open hands. Not everyone knew the names of saints. Not everyone owned books, but nearly everyone knew how to listen, how to sit quietly beside someone who hurt, how to offer a story, a sip of water, a touch on the shoulder. It was not always enough, but it was something, and sometimes something was all that was needed. We live in a world of answers now, diagnoses, prescriptions, studies, scans. But still, when pain strikes, what we long for most is not always a cure. It is comfort, presence, the assurance that we are not a lone dot. This is the thread that ties us to those who came before, not just their suffering, but their compassion, their creativity, their willingness to try, even without certainty. So if you find yourself aching in ways that have no name, remember this: you are part of a long and quiet lineage, a history not of perfection, but of persistence, not of mastery, but of meaning. Close your eyes now, if they are not already closed. Breathe slowly. Let this lineage surround you like a warm shawl, and know that whatever you carry tonight, you carry it in company. As dawn neared in medieval times, the world stirred slowly. Embers were coaxed back to flame. Jars were restoppered. Floors swept. Life resumed, not because pain had vanished, but because people had learned how to live alongside it. In this, there was resilience, but also reverence. To survive meant more than endurance. It meant adapting, creating, cherishing what could still be held. A woman with a weakened back still braided her child's hair. A blind man still carved small wooden animals by touch alone. A widower still sang the psalm his wife used to hum while kneading dough. These quiet acts were not just routine. They were affirmations, soft rebellions against despair. Time in the medieval world did not rush. It unfolded patiently. Seasons shaped the rhythm of life. Sowing, harvesting, resting. Pain, too, followed its own rhythmicity, times loud, sometimes soft, but always it was met with rhythm in return. There were prayers at morning, at midday, at nightfall, meals taken with pause, steps measured, words chosen with care. In this way, healing was woven into the fabric of daily life, and not as an event, but as a way of being. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy from those centuries long gone. Not a cure, but a cadence, a slower, gentler way of tending what hurts. Not with urgency, but with faith in the quiet passage of time. So now, if your body still holds tension, you may loosen it. If your thoughts remain tangled, you may lay them down. You do not need to solve everything before sleep. Let the rhythm of your breath match the rhythm of those who came before. Inhale, exhale, rest, like footsteps across old stone floors, like wind across heather fields. You are part of that rhythm now, and it will carry you gently into stillness. When we look back across the centuries, it's easy to see only the strangeness, leeches, the chants, the smoke and shadow. But beneath those unfamiliar tools was something utterly recognizable: the need to be cared for, the longing to be soothed, the hope that someone, somewhere, would sit beside us and say, "You are not alone in this." That is what truly endures. The shape of medicine has changed. Our knowledge has grown. We understand illness in ways medieval people could scarcely imagine. But even now we light candles in hospitals. We hold hands at bedsides. We hum songs to restless children. We whisper to loved ones in the dark. The gestures remain. Pain, even now, is not just a physical sensation. It is a call for connection, a reminder of our fragility and of our strength. So tonight, as this story nears its end, let yourself feel how deeply you belong to this long, unbroken chain of humanity. You are not apart from it. You are inside it. Your breath, your heartbeat, your memorias, all of them echo the same rhythm that moved through firelit rooms, across quiet chapels, through storm-worn cottages and crowded city streets. You do not need to know every herb. You do not need to recite every prayer. What matters is this: that you are here, now, listening, resting, letting go. The past is not behind you. It is beneath you. It holds you like soil holds seed. And from that stillness, healing begins. And now, in this final stretch of night, there is nothing more to do. No more stories to uncover. No more footsteps to trace. Only the quiet, and your breath, and the gentle knowing that you have arrived. You have traveled across centuries. You have walked beside the weary, the wounded, the healers, and the healed. You have listened to their remedies, their rituals, their hopes stitched into every act of care. And through it all, you have seen what truly endured: not the pain, but the reaching for comfort, for presence, for peace. This reaching is what binds us still. Perhaps your body is tired now, or maybe your mind is finally soft enough to drift. Let it. Let the thoughts settle like dust on a warm stone floor. Let your breathing stay slow. Let the silence feel full. There is nothing. You must carry into the next hour. No memory, no worry, no pain. You may imagine yourself wrapped in wool by a fire that crackles low. You may imagine the soft hush of a distant chapel, the echo of prayers offered not for answers, but for calm. You may picture the first light of morning stretching across the fields, revealing nothing urgently, the soft persistence of life continuing, breath by breath, and you, too, are part of that. So rest now. Not just because the story has ended, but because you are allowed. You are welcome to stay here, in warmth, in stillness, in peace. Let the quiet hold you. Let the past bless you. Let sleep take you, gently, as it always has and always will.